Hello, I'm Bay Mud. These are my talking hands. Here's my trusty Synthstrom Deluge, and today I thought it might be worth looking at a simple kind of beginner-friendly but important Deluge topic, which is around gain staging and maximizing your project volume. Every now and then I see people mention their Deluge as being too quiet, or maybe their project needs more volume, and I'm always a little surprised by that because, if anything, I find the Deluge has a lot of volume on tap, and I have to be careful with where I set this output volume knob. So I thought it would be worth looking at some of our volume and gain staging options. Disclaimer, of course, I'm just doing this for fun. I'm not affiliated with Synthstrom. I bought this unit about 8 years ago and just like doing videos to be part of the Deluge community. So as I implied off the top, if you're relying on simply turning your output volume knob all the way up and then it's still too low, there are some other features or tricks you could take advantage of prior to that volume knob to really boost your levels. In fact, I'm really careful with where I leave my output volume knob in most cases, because if I go up past 3/4 in a lot of projects, all my other gear starts clipping and getting mad at me because the Deluge is too loud. By my rough count, there are actually about 4 or 5 different level or volume controls somewhere in the Deluge that you can use and slowly build up to take advantage of for maximum volume. And we'll recap those really quickly, then dive in. So you've got oscillator level. If you're in a kit, you have your kit row level. Then you have your individual clip volumes. Then you have your actual song volume, and then you have your output volume. And that's to say nothing about the master compressor, or in general, the compressors that are all over the Deluge now, which we can talk about a little later. And I'm not even getting into things like saturation gain, which can really boost your level, but they also add distortion. So we're just talking mostly about a cleanish volume level that you can get out of your Deluge. So we'll look at a very simple example using a kit, a synth, and a bass that I've created using presets from the recently released Deluge 1.2 Community Firmware Preset Competition Pack, just because it's fun to show those sounds off. We'll start at the kit level. So let's see here. I've got a Harsh 909 kit. Some of these hits have lower probability, so we're not hearing the same simple pattern over and over and driving ourselves insane. A couple of these things will blip in here and there. But basically, we can start at our oscillator level. So with my kick row here selected, and then I press oscillator 1, you can see it's already maxed out at 50. Now I can lower that. Now our kick has gone away. That's the exact opposite of what we're trying to do here though. So no more of this lowering volume stuff. Okay, so your oscillator level is already maxed out. We'll see some examples where that's not the case later, but you don't always want to just max out your oscillator levels depending on what else you're doing with them in sound design. But so where do you go from here in a kit? Well, you also have your row level, individual volumes per row. So if I turn effect entire off, so that's no longer lit, this volume control, it now corresponds to whichever row I have selected, in this case, our kick. You can also press the audition pad and master, and you'll see that our kick row is at 33. So there's lots of room to turn this up. But then what happens is our kick is now out of balance from the rest of our kit, and we'd end up turning the rest of those up too, and you get into this kind of war of constantly turning everything up. So volume and gain staging is kind of about balance and harmony. It's an ecosystem, which we'll get into a little further with more examples. Okay, so you've gone through and adjusted the oscillator and row volume for your kick and your snare and your hi-hats, etc. What's next? Well, if you press effect entire, so that's lit. Now this gold volume knob corresponds to your overall kit level. And right now, I believe it's at 35. You can also access this through the select encoder here, master volume 35. There you go. And you can crank that up if you want. But in this scenario, there's no context. It's just a solo kit. So there isn't really anything to balance it against. So let's go back out to song view. And I'm in song view rows mode, which is just the classic kind of Deluge song view. There's grid view now, which a lot of people like. I haven't tried it yet. I still like my old school rows view. So I'm in rows view and I have my kit, a lead, and a bass. So if I turn those on, we'll have some context to adjust our kit volume. So this is just a simple lead based on the Kaleidoscope preset from the preset competition pack. I don't remember who made that either, but thank you. And then we have Obesity, which is a simple bread and butter bass sound that I made using the Deluge internal synth that's part of the preset pack you can pick up as well. So now we have some context to kind of volume adjust our various clips. And in rows mode, I can simply hold the row that I'm interested in. You see it on the screen there. That's our kit. And now the volume here corresponds to that kit. Oh, I said no more lowering volume. Sorry about that. So here we have room. It's about 35. We can go all the way up. But now again, our kit is overpowering the rest. So it's all a balance and an ecosystem. And you could theoretically just crank all the volumes of all these individual clips, but then you're going to get into some clipping and some other kind of frequency stacking. It's an ecosystem. It's got to be harmonious, like I've mentioned before. And don't worry, we have other options still to look at. So as I mentioned earlier, our synths will also have their own oscillator levels. So we can play kaleidoscope in isolation here. Shift, oscillator 1, you can see it's only at 25, oscillator 2 at 18. So I could crank those up, but then I'm affecting change to the sound design and the balance of the two oscillators. So you just got to be careful doing that depending on what you're trying to achieve. But you do have master volume, which is similar to our kit, is set at 35. And that's pretty reasonable. But again, out of context, it doesn't mean anything. So let's go back to song view. And now we bring in our kick and bass, hold the row we're interested in. This is kaleidoscope. Now we can adjust the volume. And maybe you like it very synth forward, but I like it a bit more balanced in this example. So let's keep everything around 35. And again, our bass is very similar. We have oscillator 1 at 30, oscillator 2 at 38, and then a master is at 40 because I wanted the bass a little louder. Bass frequencies can cut through better or worse depending on what you're using to listen to them through. But again, I didn't mess with the oscillator 1 or 2 volume there or level there because I didn't want to disrupt the sound design harmony of those two oscillators. But that's, again, up to you. And as I said, I'm not going to tell you what levels, what discrete numbers all your things should be set at. That's going to be very different depending on the project you're working on, the genre you're working on, are you working with samples, etc., and what you want from your project. So I like kind of balance and harmony and then trying to get volume through slow, gradual changes in gain staging. But maybe you just want to crank everything and have a party, and that's totally up to you. I'm not going to tell you where to set your levels, just that you can by using these various options. Okay, so we've looked at oscillator level, kit row level, and then we have our individual clip volume. What's next? Well, naturally, that is song volume. And that's kind of the last volume knob before we get to output volume. So in this case, let's turn our song back on. With Effect Entire on in song view, you have a couple places you can access the song volume. One being the gold knob here, and another being through the main menu here. Press your encoder, master, volume, and you'll see we're only at 26 for this song. So there's lots of room to go up there. We'll bring it back down just for the sake of this example. I'd like to still be able to talk, but that gives you an example that we could basically double our parameter value there still on that knob, and we're only at halfway on our main output volume knob here. So there's lots of volume left on tap in this project. So that brings us to a feature that isn't a level or volume control, but has huge impacts when it comes to gain staging or output volume, and that is the compressor. And I should have mentioned off the top that while shooting this video, I'm obviously on the community firmware, specifically 1.2.1. So if you want to follow along with some of these tips, you'll need to be on the community firmware when it comes to things like the compressor or the community preset pack, obviously. As of the community firmware, a master compressor was not only added, but then subsequently overhauled and improved upon, and then compressors were added to individual clips and kit rows, for example. So shout out to Discord developer I Love Steak for all that compressor work, and not only that, but listening to whiny people like me with feature suggestions and needing everything explained to them, and why can't the makeup gain be like this, etc. In any case, thanks Steak. And what that allows us to do now is get maximum volume while adjusting dynamics so that we're not clipping. Because as you stack all your synths and things like that, you can end up clipping the Deluge DAC on the way out, and it sounds kind of gross and crunchy. Let alone if you crank the output volume knob too much, you can end up clipping your external gear as well, like a PA system or your recorder or whatever. So the compressor comes in super handy when it comes to making sure you're not clipping while allowing you to have maximum output volume. What this won't be is a big discussion on how to use a compressor or what all the features are specifically. That's a whole other topic. It's going to take a while to get through. So if that's something you're interested in, maybe we could look at how to use the Deluge compressor specifically. But for now, we're just going to look at what we can do with it to get our gain and volume where we need it to be. So let's turn on our simple little example here. And in Song View, you access the master compressor by pressing the sidechain shortcut in the gold knobs. Just make sure Effect Entire is on. And because there is no sidechain for the overall song, this is now your compressor. So this knob is sort of a one knob compressor at the moment. And when I adjust this, it is adjusting our threshold as well as makeup gain. And I find, say, at the volume level we're at now, it'll be pretty subtle, but you'll hear a difference maybe as you adjust it 5 to 10 on the scale here. So you should hear a noticeable difference in volume there. And what's happening now is the threshold is catching any kind of bigger transients or peaks, and then those are getting lowered, and the auto makeup gain is adjusting everything else a little louder. So it also effectively glues your project in a nice way and gives it a bit of perceived volume increase while also adding to that balance and harmony if you use it kind of sparingly. And it goes without saying that everything is relative to how much volume you're feeding into the compressor. So in our case, we have our song volume at about half, and we had a lot of room still left in our individual clip volumes. So the compressor is only having to work so hard, but you could feed more into it. Like I said, we're at half on the song volume, and then we still have half of our output knob we haven't even touched. So we could feed the compressor more volume, and then after the compressor, we could feed our outboard gear more volume via the output volume knob there. But it's all about balance and being careful and conscious decision making with your gain staging. That's to say nothing about the individual clip compressors. So if I wanted to, I could turn our song back on, go into our kit here, select menu, turn it to compressor, and I could turn on a compressor that's just for this kit. So often, say with drum kits, maybe you have your transients are jumping up ahead of, say, your bass or your lead, and that might cause your master compressor to react differently. But if you compress your kit first a little bit, you've already caught some of those transients, and then maybe you're not having your master compressor work as hard, and you can adjust your output volume, your master song volume, and then your output volume, and you're not worried about clipping or peaking in any way because you've already got several layers of defense there. So there's one other thing you can do while we're talking about the compressor, and I don't actually recommend it, and that is turn the master compressor off. So how do you do that? Let's play our song first. Now in Song View with Effect Entire on, select sidechain, and if you press the sidechain encoder, you now get to full mode. Before it was 1, now it's full, and that means up here is your threshold, and then down here are your other options like blend, ratio, attack, release, high pass filter. So where we're going to focus right now is the blend control. And what this will do is basically allow for parallel compression while also removing the compressor entirely the further down this knob I go. You can hear it getting a lot louder. But what's also happening there is it starts to clip a little bit because there's no protection in the output now. So if you're not careful with where you have your volume set, and I turned it up from half to 30, it can cause some clipping issues. So in the community firmware, a lot of work has gone in to making sure you can get the Deluge as loud as possible while also avoiding clipping artifacts, which can sound, digital clipping artifacts can sound kind of gross. So a lot of work has gone in from the volunteer devs to make sure that you get the highest volume without clipping, and part of that includes engaging the compressors. So while you can use that blend control to turn the compressor off, I don't really recommend it if you're also going to crank all your levels. It would be fine in a low volume context, but the moment you're trying to get a high level of volume out of your Deluge, you're probably going to run into some kind of clipping artifacts and things. So if anything, you could just have the compressor on a very low threshold so it only catches certain peaks. But personally, I leave the master compressor on and just adjust the threshold a little bit here and there, and I really play with the other volume options we've talked about to help get maximum volume out of my Deluge. Okay, quick recap. We've talked about oscillator level. We've talked about kit row level. We've talked about individual clip volume, then song volume, then output volume, and we've dovetailed back to the master compressor and even the individual kit compressor, which you could also add to your bass or your synth if you wanted to. I've also talked about how to turn the compressor off, which I don't recommend. And so those are a lot of options. And like I said, I still have so much room on this volume knob. My way of working is usually set the output volume, maybe a little above half or close to 3/4, and then carefully rely on the other gain staging that we've got here to help take care of what volume needs I have before I push out from the Deluge and have problems with other gear that is relying on the Deluge signal. So hopefully this has been helpful or useful to you in some way. I know most people probably know all of this already, but just in case, I thought it was worth mentioning all the various places you can adjust your level or volume before you rely on the output volume knob. And if you're finding you're cranking that and there's still not enough juice for you, I think you're going to have to go back and look at things like your song volume and your clip volume and your compressor and things like that. So let me know if this has been helpful to you or if there are other things you'd like to cover. Maybe I missed a trick. I try to do videos like this roughly every week, usually tips and tricks or jams or just me rambling. But I'll be back probably in a week or so. So subscribe if you like that sort of stuff. Otherwise, I'm coming back anyway. So we'll see you around.